Alright, so in today's video, we're going to be breaking down the job of each position in football. So, we're not going to be focusing on the coverage or anything, or, whether it's man or zone, or, formations or anything like that. Just simply the job of each position in football and what you typically see them do. And we're going to be going over offense and defense. So first, we're going to start with the most important individual position on the field, and that's quarterback, which is represented with this Q right here. These are the players that are in the huddle. They're saying the play. They'll make adjustments at the line of scrimmage. They get the ball snapped to them. They're seeing the whole field. They're the most valuable position in football because they're the ones controlling everything. They're the ones calling the plays. Sometimes instead of the coach, they'll audible. And, the coach is the one that calls the plays, but they can audible them. And what that means is essentially change it. And they see the whole field. They control everything. They're the one making decisions as to whether to run with the ball, throw with the ball, where to throw the ball, when to throw the ball, and how accurate are they going to be throwing the ball. All that stuff. The quarterback has to do it all. It's a very difficult position. That's why it's so valuable. And that's why if you have a really good player at that position, your odds of success are much higher. Next, we've got running back, represented with this R right next to the quarterback. And the running back does a little bit of everything as well. Kind of similar to the quarterback. Not in necessarily what they do, but they do a lot of different things. More than just running, because when people think about the running back, they think they're mainly just runners. And although that is true for some, depending on their skill sets, the running back job goes past just getting handoffs, because you'll see it all the time. They'll get a handoff and they run. That's mostly what people think about for a running back. But running backs also catch the football. They can go out and run routes. Typically, they're simpler routes, kind of going out into the flat right here. They'll sit down around the line of scrimmage. They're shorter routes just to kind of be like a security blanket for the quarterback. But they also act in pass protection as well. Sometimes you'll see them, instead of taking a handoff or going out to run a route, they'll stay back in the pocket with the quarterback here in the backfield. And then if a pass rusher comes through, let's say this linebacker blitzes, he gets past the offensive line here. The running back will try, and it's usually a size mismatch, but they learn how to block. They'll kind of like dive at the blitzer's legs and do like a chip block, because you're not just going to go one-on-one. You're most likely going to get destroyed. Most of these guys really can't sustain blocks for that long, but that's why they're kind of just like this last resort, like chip at them, try to get that quarterback a little extra time. So they do more than just run the football. They can catch the football, and in pass protection as well. They can stay back here sometimes and try to help out, and almost like a sixth offensive lineman. Not really, I wouldn't say so, because they're not sustaining blocks for as long, but they do kind of act as like that sixth defense. Next, we're going to go over to the offensive line, and we're going to look at the center first and foremost. Center is represented by the C right here, and unlike guard and tackle, where there's two on each offensive line, there's only one center on the offensive line. The center is the one that snaps the ball. They're typically the most intelligent of the offensive linemen, because they, similar to the quarterback, they see the defense and can suggest I wouldn't say they audible plays unless you have a really young and experienced quarterback, but they help out the quarterback a lot in seeing the field, and the quarterback and the center have to have some chemistry. And the center's got a tough job because they've got to take on typically big defensive tackle, but not only that, they've got to snap the ball and get out of their stance in time. They've got to be able to see the field. So center's a tough position. Which is the toughest on the offensive line? It really just depends on what quarterback you have, what scheme you're in, stuff like that. But that's not what we're getting into today's video. Center is just, you got to see the field, you got to snap the ball. At a younger stage of football, pee-wee football or whatever, you're not really going to see the center really need to see the field. Nobody really needs to see the field. But when you get into those higher levels, they got to be able to see the field, snap the ball cleanly 100% of the time, and get up in their stance and sustain some blocks. Next, we got the guards. This is the right guard. This is the left guard. Right side, left side. But there's two guards. And they're not the tackles, outside tackles here, or offensive tackles here, where they're out on the outside, or the center, where they're directly in the inside. They're kind of in the middle. And what the guards are mainly doing is, again, like for all offensive linemen, it goes run blocking and pass blocking. You got to do both. If you're running the football, you got to get out and block for the running back, and then the pass game, you got to block for the quarterback. It's as simple as that. But the guards typically do have the center really doesn't move. They just stay in the middle. They snap the ball. They stay in the middle. But guards, on the other hand, they do a lot of movement, especially in today's like NFL. You'll see a lot happen, a lot in the run game. Typically in the pass protection, you're not going to see too much movement. They kind of stay fairly, not really a statue. You will see some movement. But in the run game, a lot of times you'll see this guard pull over to this side, and so that way they can get an extra blocker over here on a run play, or vice versa. You see a lot of different things like that. Typically, guards are the ones you want up at the second level because, again, like centers aren't typically that mobile. Guards are a little more mobile, but they're also not really so dedicated to the outside like a tackle. So you'll see them get out on this, what we call the second level, kind of where those linebackers are, to take on some blocks. So guards, in terms of pass protection, their job isn't too hard. Typically, they're involved with the double team because a lot of times you're only seeing 3 to 4 pass rushers. So if you've got 5 offensive linemen, only 3 to 4 pass rushers, some guys getting double teamed, and typically the guard in the center will kind of gang up in those situations. But guards definitely play a big role in both, but especially the run game in most schemes. And then you've got the outside tackles here. This is what these two T's are. You get the right tackle, left tackle. These guys are, again, it depends on the quarterback, depends on the scheme, but typically these are the guys that are most valuable in pass protection. Again, with a guy like Tom Brady, for example, Tom Brady is great at when he feels pressure from the edge, he just steps up. So his tackles have a fairly easier job because if they make a mistake, Tom Brady can usually step up and make a good throw because he feels that pressure. He's just so good. But with a guy like Tom Brady, you want to pressure him from the inside because he can't really run as well. And yeah, I mean, that's one situation where the tackle maybe isn't as valuable, but it really just depends on the quarterback, and most of the time the tackle is the most important because it's their blind side. Think about it. If you're the quarterback, you're in the pocket. If you are right-handed, you can see what's right in front of you most of the time, and you can see what's going to your right side most of the time. Like, yeah, sometimes you might be looking over here, and that's the thing. Like, you're almost always going to see what's in front of you right here. But if you're looking this way, you don't see what's coming from behind you right here. So if this defensive edge rushes, he gets past that tackle, and you're looking this way, he's going to clock you out of nowhere. You're not going to see it. And vice versa. You're looking this way, this defensive end beats that tackle, you're going to get clocked. So that's why the tackles are typically the most valuable. They have the toughest job in pass protection. Not only that, but typically they're the rushers that they're facing and the best pass rushers on the opposing defense. Typically, again, it depends. But again, if you have a Tom Brady, tackles aren't as valuable, but those quarterbacks don't come along very often, and the tackles usually have the toughest job. They have a lot of space that they have to cover. They're facing more athletic pass rushers, and the quarterback, it's tough for them to evade pressure from the outside because it's tough to see. It's much easier to see pressure coming from the inside than it is from the outside. So those are your tackles. That's your offensive line. And now we're going to move over to tight end. Now, tight end is another position, like every position in football. Like, a lot of people think the tight end is just a bigger wide receiver, right? They just catch passes. Incorrect. Big thing that tight ends do is block. You'll see them a lot of times lined up right next to this tackle, and it's not really the case here, but a lot of times you'll see them lined up right next to this tackle, and they block just like a tackle would or a guard would. They're essentially like a sixth offensive lineman sometimes. Teams do that. If you're good enough at blocking, they will use you as that really another blocker here in the trenches, which is where the line, the offensive and defensive line is. Because you have that size to you, and you got that size, you got that strength. If you have the technique down, along with that agility as well to get to the second level, and again, the size and the strength, if you can get the technique down, you can be a successful blocking tight end in the NFL. And of course, they also pass catch. Not like a running back where they necessarily run all short routes. Their route tree is a little more complicated where they can run routes a little bit deeper because they're starting closer to the line of scrimmage, and typically in passing situations, you're going to see the running back in protection more than you're going to see the tight end. If it's a passing down and you have a tight end out there, they're almost always going to run a route. But in the run game, you can absolutely rely on a lot of these tight ends to help in the block game because they've got the size and they've got the agility, and if they can get the technique down, they can do it. Most of them. Some of them aren't strong enough. That's the case, but take a guy like Rob Gronkowski. He's a great blocking tight end because he's got the technique down over the years. But not only that, he's not as strong as he used to be, but he's still very strong. And then lastly, on the offense, you've got the wide receivers. Now, the wide receivers, they do a little bit of blocking as well, but they're typically not asked to do a ton, not really relied on to do a ton. Yeah, in the run game, if you're doing a running play, you're not just going to have this wide receiver run a route and let this cornerback come in and just make a tackle for free. But you are going to ask them to block these cornerbacks, block that nearest defensive back. But again, like the cornerbacks typically aren't really making a ton of plays in the run game unless it's a bigger run. But the wide receivers still have a role in blocking. They still do, and even sometimes you'll set a screen. Like if it's a wide receiver screen, the quarterback might throw over this wide receiver, and you're asked to block. Sometimes they are, but it's not really. It's definitely a value. It's something that these guys have to get down, but it is not as big as pass catching. That's the biggest thing for these wide receivers. You're typically going to see them lined up against the cornerback. Now in zone coverage, they may not have anybody on them, but like in man-to-man, like we got a man-to-man defense right here, they'll have a cornerback on them, and the goal is we're just going to run routes. When the quarterback snaps the ball and it's a passing down, we're trying to run routes, get open, and receive the football and go as many yards as we can with it. The wide receiver, again, they contribute a little bit to blocking, but their main value, their main role is really to run routes, get open, catch balls, and make plays. Make plays in the open field. When they get that football, get more yards, get extra yards, and make some plays. Now we're going to switch over to defense. Now again, defenses are different. This is man coverage right now. It's cover 2 man, whatever. That doesn't matter. None of that matters. And some defenses you'll see only 2 linebackers. Some you'll see 4. Here you've only got 3. And again, like right here, you've got 2 defensive ends and only 1 defensive tackle, which is what we'll start with, the defensive tackle. But sometimes you'll see 2. But in this case, it's just 1 defensive tackle here. But nonetheless, their jobs are still similar. The defensive tackle is very important in the run game because they're taking on this center. They're typically taking on a lot of double teams, and their job is to kind of cover up these trenches and kind of stuff the trenches, if that makes any sense. Because a lot of runs in the NFL or NFL any level, not just the NFL, any level, are up this middle right here between these guards and the center. So the defensive tackle's job is to stuff those runs. Now, defensive tackles are still tasked to pass rush as well. Like you'll see a guy like Aaron Donald, who is a generational talent at the defensive tackle position in the NFL right now, and he's a league leader in sacks, in pressures. He's one of the best pass rushers in the league. But that's a special talent. A lot of defensive tackles aren't that great at pass rushing because they're not really that agile, and they do take on a lot of double teams, so it's tougher to defeat. But they still have a role they still get sacks here and there, but also try to collapse the pocket a little bit, pressure that quarterback to move around a little bit and not allow them to step up. But their main job typically is to stop the run first and foremost, and then we get into pass blitzing and pass rushing, sorry. Next is defensive ends. We got one here. Their job is to, really similar to the defensive tackle, it's to take these edges, right? Where the defensive tackle is mainly responsible for, up in here around the guards in the center, but the defensive end's more around this tackle. So runs to the outside, they're more responsible for stopping. But they have a little bit bigger of a role in pass rushing than a defensive tackle does. Now, again, as I said, the quarterback, it's easier to get pressure from the out. Now, it's easier to get pressure from the inside in terms of getting there on time, but it's tougher for the quarterback to see rushes from the outside. And typically, you see the defensive ends get a little more, more sacks, for example, than a defensive tackle, and they have a little bit more responsibility as a pass rusher. But similar to defensive tackle, I mean, it's really like, let's cover up these trenches, let's take on these offensive linemen, stop the run, and try to get a little bit of pressure in the pass game as well. Next, we got the linebackers. And again, I said some teams do 2 linebackers, some have 4. It really just fluctuates. Here we have 3. It doesn't really matter. The linebackers are tasked with doing a lot. They do basically almost everything. They're typically the best tacklers on the field. Some don't specialize in tackling. It all depends, but they are, most likely your team leader in tackles. Not always. Sometimes it'll be the strong safety. Sometimes maybe a cornerback. But typically, the linebacker is going to get a lot of tackles because they're in this open field. These guys are asked to run sideline to sideline. They may be asked to cover. They may be asked to do stuff in coverage. Now, there are some teams that make the idiotic decision to put linebackers on wide receivers. That typically never works out unless you are a very, very special linebacker and you're not facing a great wide receiver. But linebackers are typically asked to guard to cover tight ends and running backs in man coverage. And if it's zone coverage, they're typically taking zones on the second level right here. So not, the defensive line, but also not way back here with the safeties. Kind of the middle of the field. Sometimes they'll have to dash up to the flats, which is this area over here if the cornerback's dropping back, whatever. They do stuff in coverage. They make plays against the run where they may crash up here. They may make tackles in the open field. Again, as I said, pass coverage and blitzing as well. They'll blitz from time to time as well, whether it's lining up out here and blitzing in there, whether it's kind of disguised where it looks like they're going to cover somebody or sit back in a zone right here and then they dart in. Linebackers do it all. They get to, again, tackles for one. They also cover, and they blitz. They really just do it all. And some aren't really suited to do them all. Some may not have the athleticism to do all of it. But linebackers in general get tasked to do all those things that I just listed on a game-to-game basis. Next, we've got cornerbacks. Cornerbacks and wide receivers in man coverage will almost always be on each other. You're typically going to have a wide receiver always covered with the cornerback. Now, this defense is a little different because this is a nickel package. Typically, you're going to have like 2 safeties and 2 cornerbacks here. We've got 3. Again, none of that matters. It's just what is the job of the cornerback. Now, in zone coverage, the cornerbacks typically they're going to be zoned up in this flat right here. So they're going to be in a zone here or they're going to drop back and be in a zone over here. And in man coverage, as I said, they're going to be on that wide receiver. These guys are typically the best in coverage on your team. That's at least your hope. They should be because wide receivers are the toughest to cover in passing situations. So that's why you put your best coverage guys on those wide receivers because they're typically the most dangerous. So the cornerbacks, again, they're not really the biggest. Safeties are typically a little bigger. Linebackers and defensive linemen are definitely a lot bigger, but cornerbacks possess a lot of speed and athleticism and jumping ability and all that stuff. I mean, really, like these guys typically are only around 6 feet tall, which is tall to the general eye, but in football it's nothing overwhelming. They're only usually around 200 pounds. A lot of them, and this is at the NFL level, by the way. High school is even lower. But they possess that speed, that athleticism, that coverage ability. And now moving on to the safeties. Now, there's a bit of a difference between the strong safety and the free safety. Now, again, it depends on what players you've got there. It depends on the scheme. Most of the time, the strong safety is you'll see them a little bit more down in the box here. They may be blitzing. They may be taking on a tight end. Strong safety and free safety, though, overall, they're both safeties. They both have similar roles. In coverage, you can see them. In zone coverage, you'll see them back here a lot. Sometimes they creep up and take the middle of the field right here. And then in man coverage, you'll typically see them on a running back or a tight end. Similar to the linebackers, but they've got a little more flexibility. They're typically a little bit faster, a little better in coverage. So you may see them on a wide receiver a little bit from time to time too. But not a lot of them are asked to do that. But they get tackles as well. They are similar to a linebacker. They're almost a hybrid between a linebacker and a cornerback because they're typically a little more hard hitting. They're a little less. They're in the middle because if you took a linebacker and a cornerback, right, they're not as hard hitting and good at tackling as a linebacker typically. This is just general. They're generally not as good at tackling and as hard hitting as a linebacker, but they're more hard hitting and better at tackling than a cornerback. They're not as good in coverage as a cornerback, but they're better than a linebacker. It's really almost a hybrid. And again, as I said, you'll see the back here. You'll see him in the box. You'll see him getting tackles. You even see him blitzing from time to time. And the same goes for a cornerback. But yeah, that's my breakdown on what each position has to do. This is really just simple stuff because, again, like linebacker, you'll typically see them lined up as Sam, Will, Mike, all that stuff, all the complicated stuff. The wide receivers just typically see X, Z, A. Tight end, you'll see a Y. You'll see letters associated with them. And again, everything just comes down to what scheme is it for, when it comes to that team specific roles. But this is just general. In general, what are these positions, typically their jobs? What are they typically good and bad at? Just general, because generational talents, come from time to time, like an Aaron Donald that can be one of the best pass rushers despite the fact that he plays a position that doesn't typically generate that much pass rushing buzz, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that's going to wrap up my video.